Welcome to another episode of Further Upstream. I'm Shane Morris, here again with Tim Padgett to talk more about my conversation with Richard Lentz about his book, Uncommon Unity. Tim, I loved that he started out with the American experience because we have this motto in America, e pluribus unum, out of many, one, and we have this emphasis historically on our unity of different states and different groups of people and even different religious groups. And we're a country that has never had an established religion, at least not officially, not nationally. And of course, we've had this democratic experiment in the sense that the people are participating in electing their representatives. And it says in the Declaration of Independence, all men are equal. So he begins with America and works toward the church. And then he makes this claim that I want to hear your thoughts on because it's an interesting claim. It challenges the American experiment as well as the church's future. And it's this idea that if all men are created equal, that everyone gets a say in the political process, at least in theory, right? The man who wrote those words didn't quite give everyone a say in the political process. But the theory is that everyone has a say. And that means that everyone's perspective is weighed. But Lentz points out that that contains the seeds of ever-increasing diversity, which actually makes unity impossible at a certain point. Because if you are truly diverse on everything as a people, then there's nothing in common that unites you and holds you together. And he uses this as a kind of foil and parallel for the church to understand our unity and diversity. So from a historian's perspective, like from the perspective of someone interested in and having studied history, talk to me about that because yeah, America is based on this ideal of equality, but I see the tension.
Yeah, it is. I think it is a good example because America is such a dramatic place. America is the best and the worst of humanity in so many ways. You do see this great tension between the collective and the diverse. And I think that you see two strands going at the same time. As you mentioned in your conversation, it's very clear that we're, if anything, more disunited now than any time since, around 1860-something. There's a lot of tension. It's about fundamental things. It's not just about superficial things. There's not much of a center anymore to America, a shared sense of values. There's a great divergence. At the same time, we're fairly homogenized in other ways. I mean, malls aren't really a thing as much anymore as they used to be, say 20 years ago or something like that. But I remember walking around a mall once and realizing if you were blindfolded and drugged, you didn't know how much time had gone by, and you were dropped into a mall anywhere in North America, you would have no idea where you were. Maybe the accents would tell you, but the stores are the same. The habits are the same. The clothes are the same. There is a great homogenization that has happened over American culture. So there is this enforced diversity along with this enforced homogenization. So both of those are going on at the same time. I do think that you see some of these tensions develop because like the different regions, you and I both hail from the South. Very different perspective, just attitude on life that from that region to other parts of the country. I remember I had a friend who he grew up in St. Louis, and we always thought this is in Tennessee that I knew him. We always thought he was kind of rude, but then I moved to St. Louis, and then I had to email. Or I called him up. It was about 20 years ago. I called him up and said, "Rob, I'm sorry, you're not a jerk. You're just from St. Louis." I'm not sure if he took that as a compliment or not. Of course, then I moved to Chicago, and Chicago prides themselves on their terseness or the practicality thing. So yeah, you do see these diversities, and you do see the good in these things within American culture. I mean, it is fun. My time, I lived in Chicago for 10 years. I really liked it. They have a not crass, but this directness, very focused, corrupt as all get out, right? But there are lots of things you can admire about the Chicago mentality. Then I moved here to Colorado. And just as a practical example, if you drive around in Chicago, it's a little nuts. If there's a space, they're going to take the space. They're going to drive. Whereas in Colorado, maybe it's our favorite little herbal remedy for stress that so many people take out here, but people are just not in a hurry. So you do see these tensions, and they develop over time. And how they all work together and how we maintain that sense of unity, it is a little tricky. I think it's an open question. Someone from New England 200 plus years ago and someone from Florida 200 plus years ago, they would have had very little in common, very little culturally in common. But they were, in one sense, probably had a lot more in common than many people in, say, San Francisco and some southern city or some other place, more conservative place. There is that tension that really is lived out. We have this sense of commonality as we are all Americans, but we're, if anything, more shattered and fractured. Fractures, I think, is a good word for it. So it's somehow we're both fractured and homogenized at the same time. And how that works out in the future, it'd be anybody's guess.
Yeah, well, actually, 200 years ago, I don't think there were many people of European descent at all in Florida. I think there were natives and there were some cattlemen, but that was about it.
Yeah, I was reading a Civil War thing and was talking about, at the time in the Civil War, Florida was the least populous southern state, and that's because it's hot as blazes down there. So, and without air conditioning, it's basically unlivable.
Yes, and every so often a titanic storm comes through and blows everyone away, and you couldn't predict those before that point. Yeah, the unity and diversity thing I found very interesting because of the modern preoccupation with diversity. So I brought up this phrase that you often hear, and I call it a human resources type phrase, but you see it in corporate slogans and all kinds of contexts, that diversity is our strength, that something about diversity is supposed to be empowering or ennobling or strengthening to an organization. And that sounds good, but if you've ever tried to run an organization or a family or even a church or something, you know that strength is dependent on unity. It's very dependent on a unity of perspective, a unity of goals, a unity of convictions and ideals. You cannot have any organization, let alone a strong one, if you're simply valuing diversity for its own sake. Now, diversity in the context of a deeper or more transcendent unity can be a strength. In fact, I would say, and he definitely argues in the book, that's the argument Paul is making when he invokes the metaphor of the body and its many parts for the church and says, look, this is the new man, this is the body of Christ. Not everyone's the same. Everyone has their own different strengths, and that together builds up the body and helps it to grow. So it seems like one and the other are insufficient by themselves, that the ideals of unity and diversity actually do have to be held together. And so that's where you get to the wisdom of this E pluribus unum motto in the American context, and the wisdom of things like the body motto in the context of the church. Now, this raises some interesting questions about first of all, about the intersection between Christian theology and the church and our country. So today, a popular pastor tweeted about why he doesn't fit in on the left or the right, and in particular the right, because he said he's not a Christian nationalist. And he argued that a Christian should always propose rather than impose our faith in the civil realm. And this is language that Chuck Colson often used. And so this is nothing alien to you and me. But I've come to kind of question this instinct, because there is no naked public square, right? It's good to propose the faith, but is it truly wrong in any respect to impose the tenets of the Christian worldview? And I ask that because someone's ideals will be advanced in the public square. They will be advanced in law. Why shouldn't they be Christian ones? Currently, the ones being advanced are anything but Christian. They're post-Christian, secular, progressive ideals. And so you have to ask yourself from the outset, is it possible to have a truly diverse civil life as a people? And then that spills into questions of the church. How diverse can the church really be? There's a denomination that I have some friends in, and it tries, I don't know how successfully it always works, but they try to hold together certain convictions that would split other denominations. And so one example is infant baptism. I think the majority of the denomination holds to infant baptism. They have a covenant community into which they welcome their little ones. But there are Baptists within the denomination, and they are, in good standing. They do their own thing. I'm not sure how all that works, but that's an attempt to bring together a diversity that wouldn't normally work, just because you've got to have some marker that you're either in or out officially as a member. And well, for thousands of years, baptism has has been the marker. And so I'm curious about that distinction, because I'm not sure where the exact answer lies in terms of the nation or in terms of a church, because I agree with Lentz that it's good to have a sort of latitude for a lot of different beliefs. Like I don't think we should have an intolerant civil life as a nation. I think we should allow different denominations. I don't think we should persecute Buddhists and so forth. But does that mean that we have a value neutral public square? I don't think it can. I don't think it's possible. And if you try, then somebody else is just going to, come in with their values.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you get to politics and you talk about enforcing uniformity, you really do get into some problems, because you say the executive order or the legislative trick that you use to gain power, to impose your views, can very quickly, if there's a new election or just a non-electing country, a non-democratic country, somebody else can just come to power and they'll just do the same thing to you. When we talk about the in the West, in America, in Europe, and places like that, our call for tolerance is originally, not what many people think of it today. Many people think of the calls for pluralism as basically relativism. They treat the idea that political pluralism, that is allowing multiple sorts of things within a given society, they treat it as basically relativism, that nothing is particularly true, therefore we shouldn't impose anything at all. Originally, I would argue, the West arrived at diversity, allowing diversity, ideological diversity, religious diversity, even cultural diversity, almost out of weariness. Because you've got the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, which just shatters the norm that had been going on before. And for 100 years, or depending on where they were, for decades, here and there, there'd be peace, there'd be some fighting, stuff like that between the various Protestant Catholic groups. But then you get to the 17th century, and as was mentioned in your conversation, that war breaks out. There's the famous, the 30 Years' War between 1618 and 1648. Is a bloody war. When you extrapolate the numbers up to contemporary populations, it's huge. I forgot, it was something like an eighth or more of the German population was killed. It was a bloody thing, bloody mess. What we have in coming out of that, not the Enlightenment, which is a little bit later. You might say the Enlightenment comes from this. What you have in that is kind of this recognition, a resignation, almost, that the state is a blunt instrument. It's a sledgehammer, not a scalpel. And the state shouldn't be determining these things. That those things should be left not alone, not because there isn't a difference between Roman Catholicism and Protestantism, and even within Protestantism between Lutheranism and Reformed and Anglican and Baptist and whatnot. It's because they recognize that it's not going to work. It's not going to work in this situation. So it's not saying there's no difference. It's saying we can't force the differences to go away. And so from that, you kind of then later have this epistemological crisis of the Enlightenment, where people are doubting because they've seen the metaphysical superstructure that had guided Europe for hundreds and hundreds of years is fractured, is broken. People begin to question and question and question, except for, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. They can trust themselves, and they shatter into these kind of individualistic stuff. So what you see originally in Western history, which flows over here to America and to great parts of the world now, is a recognition that you can't force it. Not because one thing isn't right and one thing isn't wrong. When you and I say, as you did, we don't think you should persecute Buddhists, it's not because we agree with the tenets of Buddhism. It's because a forced faith is no faith. This is something that actually goes back to the early church. A coerced faith is no faith at all. You see that when we say we shouldn't chase down Buddhists or Muslims or whatever, you and I are not Roman Catholics, we're Reformed. We wouldn't chase down Roman Catholics. It's not because we agree with Petrine supremacy. It's because we think that, one, there's bigger fish to fry, and also because it's a recognition that the state has certain roles. Allowing that diversity. That has been something I think that we miss in many conservative discussions about the First Amendment and things like that. The First Amendment in the Congress will make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or restricting the free exercise thereof. That was a great boon for the American church, because all of a sudden, if you're a pastor, you can't just sit back in your laurels expecting to get your pay. You had to actually engage. there was chaos that resulted. I mean, the second Great Awakening, anyone who's done some history about that, it was a pretty nutty time. And you get also the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses and all these others who come out of all this craziness in the 19th century. But it was a very positively fermented time as well. The establishment of huge organizations, the lack of a central control allowed for diversity, allowed for this diversity to thrive. It's kind of like ideological capitalism. If the state has its thumb on the scales of the economy, well, look at the state-controlled economies. They're a mess. If the state has its thumb on the scales of ideological competition and cultural competition, well, only the one's going to work. There's the famous phrase, I forget who came up with it, but it's 90% of everything is excrement. I'm sure it uses a harsher word in the original. But if the government, if there is this central controlling enforced unity, well, there's a 9 in 10 chance that the one part that's going to come up is going to be bad, is going to be that excrement. And so I think that the diversity allows for creativity. It allows for human ingenuity. But you're right. There's a problem if it's just left completely open-ended. And I think that what we're seeing today in our world is where diversity has switched from being a means to a better society to the sign of a better society. So rather than saying, by having the freedom in the marketplace of ideas for people to discuss things, for everyone to challenge one another and to sharpen one another, iron sharpens iron, now simply having the diverse views is the only goal. And inevitably that ends up with just another set of reinforced mores, with usually some very superficial, often biologically based understandings. It ends up being, the joke of academia is the academics' idea of diversity is people of different genders and ethnicities all saying the same thing. And that's what we sadly ended up with.
Yeah, there's a paradoxical conformity amid all this sort of talk of diversity. And it goes into the part of our discussion where we mentioned that the Western enlightened, educated liberal tends to approach other cultures and other religions with the assumption that deep down, they're all Western educated, enlightened, post-Christian liberals, right? And so they will assume that a Muslim from Africa, for instance, values diversity in the same way they do, or sees religious tolerance and pluralism as self-evidently good things. Well, no, that person is not going to see those things in all likelihood as self-evidently good, because there's no reason in their religious faith or worldview to hold those ideals. Those ideals are Western, liberal, and post-Christian, partly because they come out of the Western Christian tradition, and that's where all this stuff developed. And there's this paternalistic condescension, that just looks down on everyone and says, "Oh, we enjoy your diversity as long as it's cool foods that taste nice and different clothing types, and we can hang up all your flags in a big line around the cafeteria in the middle school." But at the end of the day, we all have to be, what's the acronym? It's weird. Western educated, industrial, rich, democratic. And it's the weird. We all have to be weird. But not everyone is weird in that sense. Not everyone actually does follow those patterns. And Glenn Scrivener does a great job of pointing this out in his book, The Air We Breathe, I think. But Tim, I also think on the way that terms and things that we have, concepts we think we understand have changed. And so, for instance, I'm reading The Story of Abortion in America, Street Level History. This is co-written by Marvin Olasky and Leah Savas. And they talk about how the concept of person has actually shifted. So when we hear people from the 1840s and 50s talking about personhood, what they're talking about is just human beings, members of the human species. They have no distinction between a human biologically and a person. We have invented such a distinction largely in order to service abortion and to uphold that as a valid and constitutional thing, since you can't deprive people of life, liberty, or property without due process, right? Well, simple solution to that is define unborn children as non-persons. I think something similar may have happened with religious freedom and disestablishment and toleration and so forth. So the fact that we have a First Amendment that says Congress will make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, we look at that through a 21st century lens, and we say, oh, that means that there won't be any religiously motivated legislation. Well, hang on, because everybody who signed that also supported things like blue laws and anti-obscenity laws, and was fined swearing in people on Bibles and public acknowledgments of scripture and putting up statues of Moses and stuff. It's like, do you know how recently we had blue laws in this country? Of course, well, you do, of course, but many people don't. That means closed on Sunday, mandatorily. Like, you have to observe the Christian Sabbath as a business. Well, isn't that imposing religion? That was not seen as imposing a sect or a denomination. That was seen as just good law, good application of moral ideals to the civil life, our shared life together. And so we have to ask ourselves, do we understand the First Amendment the same way as people who are closer to the writing of the First Amendment understood it? I think we have to be very careful when we assume the meaning of things like diversity and inclusion and unity.
Yeah, you were talking about the acronym, the weird acronym. It reminds me of a conversation I had with, I think it was Dick Keyes. He at least used to head up the L'Abri branch in near Boston. And we were at a L'Abri conference, and we were talking about the bumper sticker coexist. And there's an irony to that, because it's an astonishingly imperialistic conformist statement. Because Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc.ism, they all have mutually exclusive beliefs. And for us rich white Westerners to go to a Muslim in Egypt, a Hindu in India, a Buddhist in China or Japan or what have you, an animist in various places, and saying, your beliefs are actually all the same. That is astonishingly insulting. To say that all of your beliefs, they all run together. And there's a line, it's in one of Lewis's books, and he talks about that people always say that the practices of religion are different, but everyone's beliefs are actually the same. And he says, no, it's actually the other way around. Most practices of religion are pretty similar. There's some kind of altar, there's some kind of sacred book, there's some kind of ethics, there's some habits and sacred years and days, holy days and stuff like that. But their beliefs are where things are different. So we as Westerners, we come and we say to these people, all around the world, we just say, oh yeah, you're all the same. You Muslims, you don't actually believe that Jesus isn't the Son of God. Or they say that none of it matters. I mean, and you and I have watched enough sci-fi things. How often is religion genuinely portrayed off in the future? It's very rarely shown off in the future. Usually it's, I think you've said you've not read the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, but it's one of my favorites. But religion is at best a subterfuge. Everybody knows that it's a subterfuge. At least the elites know. It's never portrayed as a genuine thing, and I think that's our contemporary Western snobbery to assume that everyone's exactly going to come out the way we think of it. The religion is just a hobby, and I think that gets into the difference as to why you're having questions like the Jack Phillips here, just up the road in Denver, and people complaining about religious influences in society, because they've changed from freedom of religion as a matter of liberty of conscience and able to live your life according to your religion and the state won't stop you, to freedom of worship. And the scary thing about freedom of worship, and there's lots of talk about that today, and it is explicitly spoken of as, well, that's something for you at Sunday morning or Saturday if you're Jewish, or Friday if you're Muslim. That's fine in the mosque, in the synagogue, in the church, but it shouldn't get out anywhere else. The scary thing about that is freedom of worship like that is exactly the sort of thing that you saw into the totalitarianisms of Europe in the 20th century. The Nazis and the communists were perfectly happy for you to believe what you wanted to believe, to say what you wanted to say in the confines of your church or synagogue or whatnot. Obviously, the Nazis were not happy with anyone in the synagogues, but the principle was the same, of that you could do what you wanted so long as it didn't spill out. The Christians were left alone by the Nazis unless they spoke up. The Christians, even by the communists who were explicitly atheistic, were left alone. I'm not suggesting that your average person down the road these people who are persecuting, and I think persecuting after these repeated things, persecuting Jack Phillips, I'm not saying the totalitarianisms, but many of the principles are still the same. The principles are that religion is something to be confined to Sunday morning, and that's it. It should have no bearing on your life whatsoever. It's a great rejection of diversity. I think if we want diversity, you and I should be able to sit down with the Muslim clerics and have a good conversation, even an intense conversation. I have a great memory from back in St. Louis days where Friend of mine, Brent Kilman was his name. He's now a pastor up in the Northwest somewhere. We got in this heated argument. There was I think it might have been like Super Bowl Sunday or something like that. We got in this heated argument. We were clashing. It was great. But we would pause every once in a while and say, well, this beer was really good. You should try it. But we managed to drive everyone else out of the room. Literally, it was an apartment where there was one large room. Everyone else left and to go to the smaller room because we were being obnoxious. But there's something beautiful about that. There's something beautiful about me being able to, harangue him back and forth and things like that. There's a beauty and diversity in what we're doing now. It's fake. It's not only fake, it's hypocritical, but it isn't even real. There's not a realness to the diversity because you're not allowed to disagree.
Yeah, there's a de facto reversion to a kind of unity we're not talking about, which is that paternalistic, unspoken assumption that we're all just secular Westerners. And that's what underlies this superficial Happy Meal type diversity that we like to show off and pretend we have, but we really don't. And this gets to the core contention of Lent's book. It's called Uncommon Unity, and I think that's sort of an allusion to the fact that we don't have everything in common, but we do have one core thing that matters in common as Christians, and that's what brings us into unity with each other. That's what actually allows our differences to function in a productive and God-honoring way. So he challenges what he calls the inclusion narrative of democracy, that democracy is just an ever-widening circle of inclusion. We're just welcoming more and more and more and more and more people in. And he says that doesn't make sense unless you are welcoming someone into something with which they agree, a core unitive proposition or belief. And in America, our core unitive propositions or beliefs are, well, they're expressed in the founding documents, but the core one is that I think probably best stated by the Gettysburg Address when Abraham Lincoln says that the experiment in America is government of the people, by the people, for the people. Like it's about self-government. It's about trying to govern ourselves instead of being governed by a monarch. And can that sort of thing work, especially given the diversity of the different states, the original religious context of those states, and so forth. So this is self-government. But in order for a nation to last self-governing, then it needs to have some sort of uniting principle or set of ideals. And it's not clear to Lentz that we have those anymore. He actually argues that the thing that unites Americans at this point is procedure. It's bureaucracy. It's just we have these procedures in place and we just do things procedurally, like go to the Supreme Court to argue things. Well, Anthony Kennedy already said that at the heart of liberty is the right to define your own concept of reality and meaning in the universe, right? Well, what if my concept of reality and meaning in the universe doesn't have a board of 9 unelected people in black robes in Washington, D.C. deciding issues of great national importance? What then? and the answer is, well, tough. You have to live under these procedures because they're established and this is how we work. You see, at every step, unity does have to be enforced, but a unity that's merely procedural simply can't last. The fragmentation and balkanization of American life under these increasingly narrow terms of unity cannot last. And I think Lent's great concern is to keep the church from going down that same path of balkanization. And he argues, I think very beautifully, that the church has something that can actually unite us in a way that maybe the United States it's not possible to keep it united long term. And that is, of course, Jesus Christ. Now, here's the question, and this is where I kind of push back on him a little bit. When you go down the street and you see all the different church buildings, all the different denominations, all the different bad puns that a pastor decided to put up on a sign, right? The display of different and disunited bodies on some level has to be a scandal. It cannot be the plan of Christ that all these things continue to exist in exactly this way. Now, I'm not talking about worship styles here. I'm not talking about the church in Zimbabwe that had the 12-hour service. That's hilarious and kind of awesome, to be honest. We're talking about, are the babies in or are the babies out? Which confession do we follow? what do we think exactly is happening in the Eucharist? And do we think that the church down the street that has a different belief about that, are they actually taking the Eucharist? Like these are issues on which somebody's wrong and somebody's right. And our division there, or divisions over even stupider things, right? Or the worst kinds of divisions of all, I guess, are the ones where one church begins to deny core tenets of the faith and leads people astray in its midst. So I'm thinking of the liberal mainline denominations that are really just dropping the ball on that, or maybe worse than that. That's probably far too merciful. They're apostatizing. Many of them are just utterly abandoning the faith. There are people in their midst who are still in the faith, and so it's a scandal to see that whole thing unfolding. But Lentz, he claims that the unity spoken of in Scripture for the church is eschatological. It's primarily eschatological in character, meaning it's about the unity we're going to have at the end of time when we come together and all tribes, tongues, and nations worship in the New Jerusalem. But that until then, we should just be sort of tolerant of each other and allow for these differences. I get that, and I agree with that as far as tribes, tongues, and nations are concerned. I'm not so sure that that's true when it comes to the divisions I just described, which I think unbelievers do look at and say, that's a scandal. The division of believers there is a problem. And I'm not persuaded that when Jesus prays for unity among his disciples in John 17, I think it is, in the high priestly prayer, right? That he does not have unity in this age, in this world in mind, because he says, this is why I want you to be united, so that the world can see that you're mine, right? He constantly has reference to the world seeing the disciples' unity and love for one another, and therefore they know that you are mine. Well, that means it's this worldly. Now the question is, what kind of unity is he talking about there? Is it institutional? Is it what I've heard called diachronic, meaning across time? Is it a unity of belief and creed? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that actually plays well into a book I'm reading. I'm reading Peter Leithart's commentary on 1st and 2nd Kings. Really interesting. You would like it. In one passage, he was talking about the famous bit about a remnant. With Elijah is talking about how God has preserved 7,000 as a remnant who have not bowed the knee to Baal. And he makes the argument. I'm not sure if I believe it, but he at least just makes a good case. Leithart, that is, not Elijah. He makes the case that remnant isn't what we usually think of it as. It's not the example of there's the 7,000 people who are still at that time the remnant. He says American church takes a lot of emphasis from this image that all the rest of the church is worshiping Baal, right? The church in the broadest sense of the word, they're worshiping Baal, but we are the remnant. We're holding on. He says that's not it. He says the remnant is not those who at this time are good as opposed to the ones who are bad, but it's the ones who are going to survive. He notes that that usually that word for remnant is closer to what we would say survivors, not endurers, not the people who are still hanging on. So what he thinks that Elijah is being told there is that I'm not giving up on Israel. In that sense, all Israel will be saved. And that's going to include some of the people who are not doing the good things. So he's making the argument that when we think about the remnant, we should not think you and I in our little Presbyterianness and many of our colleagues in their Anglicanness, the others in the broad evangelicalness, we're each individual little remnants of the true church. But rather, we're all together. God's going to endure. He's going to hold on to that group. And I'm not sure what I think of that, but it allows for a study of the diversity remaining. Because think about this. Are you and I going to go to a 12-hour worship service?
No.
I don't think so.
Not a chance. I have 4 kids, and getting them to sit through a 1-hour worship service is hard enough.
Yeah. And we just have to think about discussing those things. I think some of the things are temperamental, culturally temperamental. Like here in the United States, in the Western world, English-speaking world, most people of our stripe, Reformed types, tend to be on the cerebral end of things. Very bookish. That's a focus. People who tend to be much more emotional in their personality tend to be attracted much more towards more expressive forms of worship and things like that. Some of that is neither here nor there. I know that a lot of our Reformed types tend to look at people in more expressive forms of worship as being suspect at best, right? And what do they look at us as? I remember at one time there was this a church I was attending to. This was a Presbyterian church, and they had done one of the usual short-term mission trips off to some of the Caribbean islands. And this young woman came back and she was talking to the whole church about the experience. And she said, we have so much to learn from them because they're so free and unafraid in their worship. What was she saying? She was saying that cerebral types, people who are much more, introspective and things like that they were afraid. Well, as an introvert, I completely recognize that moment because extroverts really do think that introverts are afraid, right? And they're afraid of all sorts of things. When people, like when you and I in our the clothing we're wearing, we go to a Spanish-speaking church and a lot more colorful things. Is someone right? Is someone wrong in that? Well, no, in that sense. But we also recognize there has to be a line. Now, if you're on the right, you're going to say that line, as I put in my notes here, you might say that line is the rainbow flag. If you're on the left, you're going to say that line is the Confederate flag, or those are stand-ins for all sorts of things. But we all recognize there is a place where it goes too far. I have done, in my academic research, I've done a lot of critical analysis of some Southern theologians who advocated for slavery. And they were wrong, and you can read my papers and see why I think they're wrong. But they were very wrong, but they also were right about lots of things. Some of the people today who are affirming about that, they're also wrong. How do we draw that line? I think there's two questions we got to deal with. Is there a way to draw that line, and where is that line? So I think I've used this example before. There's a conversation you were probably at, and one of our Roman Catholic friends, I said that you're Roman Catholic, I'm a Calvinist, which means we disagree on a lot, but we agree that there's something to disagree about. I think that's a key thing. If we say that there is a standard that's higher than all of us, deeper than all of us, more transcendent than all of us, then we can judge one another, and we can make that call then. We can make the call as to whether it's just a personality type or a cultural trait that's neither here nor there, or if this is something actually going beyond the bounds. I think for most of our culture, we don't think there is a standard. We think that difference is good, but that's the only standard we have. They have no way, the people who most preach about diversity would have no fundamental way to say that the Confederate flag churches are wrong. They were wrong, very. But the people today so crying for diversity, they don't have a reason to say why. Not fundamentally. They will have they cheat on the logic at some point. Now, if only we have, an example I like to use about diversity, it's like if you take a basketball, and just pretend instead of the black stripes that go all around, it's all the orange or whatever, and it's all those little bumps. And if you think about those little bumps, they're different in place relative to one another, but they're equal in distance from the center point. So relative to one another, we each have our roles, we each have our diversities, our strengths, our gifts, our preferences, and stuff like that. But they get their meaning not from where they are relative to one another, but where they are relative to that center point. And I think that's what we've lost as a culture. Is that that we've abandoned the idea that there is a center point. And that's what the church can do. We can preach an embracing diverse unity. And I think that that's something that the church can really do that Islam can't do, that in many ways Judaism can't do, certainly many other places can't do. That balance of, as your guest, as Lentz talked about, with the Trinity, we have this at the fundamental level of the cosmos, unity and diversity in one thing is the fundamental element of the entire cosmos. And that's amazing. That's really amazing because it's not fake. It's not biased. It's nothing of those things. We are like a concert. It's not 100 violins.
Yeah, it's not provisional either. It's not something that diversity is not something that we simply tolerate until such time as God squashes us all together to become, a bunch of uniform Buzz Lightyears on the shelf together in a row. Unity is actually something that emerges in our diversity, and that diversity will be carried forward, according to Revelation, into the New Jerusalem, into the new creation. So people are still coming from different tribes and speaking different languages, or at least capable of speaking different languages, and perhaps we'll all understand each other at that point. But the beauties of those things will be preserved, just as the beauties of the individual parts of a body are preserved, or the individual participating species in an ecosystem, like Lentz and I talked about. Clearly, I think I saw his eyes light up when I mentioned a forest or an ecosystem in nature, and so he gets that metaphor. He understands that because he's seen the same things I have. It's like God loves diversity. He didn't just make one kind of butterfly or one kind of bird or one kind of, he didn't even make one kind of heavenly body or one kind of star. I mean, there's just enormous diversity everywhere, and it's on purpose. And so we should not be surprised when there's enormous diversity among human beings, among Christians. The question is, as he puts it in like the penultimate chapter, what are the differences that make a difference? What are the things that we actually have to say no to? Because, like you said, they take us further out of the circumference of the unity around Christ. That Christ is the center, and we can be at different places, but we all have to be tied in orbit around Him, in our grand unity around Him. When we leave that and we're not orbiting Him anymore, we're no longer part of the same body. We're no longer part of the same church. We're no longer Christians, is the case that J. Gresham Machen makes. And so, we don't have time to go through a list of doctrines and say, here's one that makes a difference, here's one that doesn't. And he sort of resisted that impulse to be so specific on this. And maybe that's not the right way to go. Maybe we should be very specific. But as we finish up here, the thing that I took away was that there really is a unity that holds us together, that we're diverse in order that we can bring our separate strengths and gifts and goodness and contribution into the New Jerusalem, into the kingdom of God. He made us different in order that we could be united in our difference. He didn't make us different for difference's own sake. And that's something that we've got to remember as we critique the balkanization of American society and the fracturing of American politics, but even more importantly, something that we have to remember as we live together as Christians and we look at one another and we say, you know what? That's not a difference that makes a difference. That is not something that is worth breaking fellowship over. And it's something that we can actually not just tolerate about each other, but look at each other and say, that's good. That's strengthening. It's strengthening not because diversity is our strength, right? It's strengthening because diversity is the means by which unity expresses its strength. The means by which unity actually works out in a beautiful multiplicity of ways, not just in one uniform, boring way, because we don't have a uniform, boring type God. He doesn't make things like that. He himself has, and we tread on holy ground when we speak this way, and we have to risk not becoming social Trinitarians, right? We don't want to do that. But he himself has a diversity of persons united in a unity of one God. And our language breaks down as we even attempt to say these things, right? But it's there. And the Trinity does offer something, probably something at the very core, definitely something at the very core of this confusing and challenging dichotomy between unity and diversity.
Just an example to go up about the beauty of diversity and how it might fit well. In the Second World War, going to go more history stuff here. The Germans and the Japanese thought that the Americans and British could not read their codes. They thought that they were completely impenetrable. They had a uniform view, right? Absolutely uniform view. The Russians had a bit of the same problem as well. But the Americans and the Brits managed to break their codes. One of the reasons the Americans and the Brits could break their codes is because we would tolerate a lot of diverse sorts of people. There's a movie, I think it's called Enigma, and it talks about some of the weird people who got collected at Bletchley Park in England to break the German codes. And it required that diversity, those quirky people who didn't fit in nicely into a nice, neat little mold, in order to make it work. Having all those diverse people working together enabled them to do what a uniform group of people could not do, and that is break an impossible code. But the thing is, it wasn't simply the diversity. They had to have that common goal. They had to have those guidelines that shaped the direction of their labors towards a real good. And so I think that that's perhaps a good example. There's lots of examples of that balance between unity and diversity that actually creates such thriving excellence. But it has to have both those elements together. As you guys in your conversation talked about, it is a tension. It's not a equal parts. It's not an average between the two. It's a tension between the two. And that's where the beauty part comes.
Well, thanks, Tim. This was enjoyable. I do recommend the book a lot. I think this is an enlightening book, thought-provoking book, just one that challenges a lot of our dearly inherited assumptions about the value and form that diversity takes. So check it out. It's called Uncommon Unity, Richard Lentz. Tim, thanks again for joining me. Next week, we'll flip a coin and decide whether you or Casey joins me for further Upstream.
Absolutely. See you then.